Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm talking about Saturn in Pisces 1 year on. In other words, Saturn entered Pisces last March, and we're now almost a year later. What have we understood and what more is there to come? I'm going to explore the future as well as reviewing some of the things that have happened and are in the process of happening at the moment, which we can relate quite directly with Saturn in Pisces. And I'm going to do it, first of all, as I usually do, taking you through the general kind of picture and the trends, the things that are happening in the world, especially to do with the monarchy, for instance, and there are some other important connections with Saturn and Pisces in this regard. And then, of course, I'm going to take you through sign by sign. And we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of the full moon that's going to be taking place on the 24th of February, because that's just a couple of days before the all-important conjunction of the Sun and Mercury to Saturn. And that's a kind of mini Saturn return. You know, the last time it happened was, back last year. And so here we are looking at it again and seeing now we're on a second round of Saturn in Pisces. And whenever we're doing something, when we think about a Saturn return, Saturn has gone completely around our charts. It's taken 29 plus years to make that entire journey. It's looked at every planet from every angle during that 29-year plus journey, and it is returning to its new position. And so what's happening is that it's starting out again with a new tour of the zodiac, but it has a different resonance now because we are, 29 years on. But also in terms of Saturn coming back to conjunct Saturn again, or Saturn, moving forward through the zodiac as it started its journey last year, we have a different resonance. And when we think about the last time Saturn was in Pisces, 1994 to 1996, we're experiencing Saturn in Pisces at a different level. Time has moved on. We've developed during these 29 or so years. And of course, we're older and wiser, and as a new generation experiencing for the first time. So it's different. It's not all the same. There isn't an identical picture really for Saturn in Pisces. It has some strong themes that repeat, but it's always going to be slightly different. And another reason why it will be different is not only what else is going on with the outer planets, with the transpersonal planets, where are they, how are they connecting to Saturn in Pisces, but it's also some of the really important cycles we're seeing. And one of those is going to be in the August of this year, 2024, we're going to see the Saturn-Jupiter square. I will refer briefly to this in a moment, but this is the first square since Jupiter and Saturn began their cycle in 2020. So it's a very important junction that we're going to see this year. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later, but I'm also going to devote an entire video to it because it's so important. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle has such, it's very important for affairs of state. And big things tend to happen on Saturn-Jupiter stations, Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions, Saturn-Jupiter squares, Saturn-Jupiter oppositions. So 2024, certainly the second half of 2024, is going to be hugely important for all nations and, the world as a whole, with some of the things that are going to happen that are going to change the map and set a whole lot of new leaders, new constitutions in motion. So it's really, really important. These are themes that are returning. But we've also got a really, really important one with the royal family. And when we think what's happened recently during the cycle of Saturn in Pisces, when Saturn entered Pisces, the Queen Elizabeth II had died. We knew Charles was king in waiting, so to speak, and his coronation occurred during the early part of Saturn in Pisces. And of course, Prince Charles has Saturn in Virgo. There was a Saturn opposition there. But the point I really want to make about this, bringing it right up to date, is that we do have some uncertainty over King Charles and his health right now. And I have sort of posited the idea in my Friday Bites and elsewhere that there is, I was going to say a chance, but it may well be more of a likelihood that his current health crisis might lead to a decision that he would step back, not only in order to, you know, recuperate and live out the rest of his life as he would choose to live the rest of his life out, but also because the transition will be easier if that now King William has to be a reality. At least this transition is smoother. And we already saw this happening this year in Denmark, with Queen Margrethe of Denmark abdicating. Never happened in 900 years. She abdicated. We now have a new king, Frederick X. So it's a pattern. It's a resonance. It's something that is happening at the moment. And I have talked quite a lot about King Charles and his natal chart with Neptune in the 4th house. This is a sense of sacrifice, of giving up something. And if we go back to 1935, 1936, Saturn in Pisces, that was when King Edward VIII was crowned, Saturn in Pisces, and within a year, he was a king for 9 months, I think, he abdicated. So is there a resonance here as well? I suspect there may be. And the other interesting thing is, when we look at royalty and this Saturn-Neptune cycle, and Saturn in Pisces, in 1936, when King Edward VIII abdicated, Saturn was opposition Neptune. And as we go through this year, coming into next year, Saturn and Neptune will be within a hair of each other. They will be not exactly in conjunction. It takes place in Aries, but they are so close as to be entwined. And so there's a resonance there with that period of time as well. Now, before I take a look at the map of what's going on, the astrology in horoscopic form, I also want to mention a couple of other things, and I'm going to mention it before I look at the chart. And that is that Saturn is in Pisces. Yes, it's moving through, it's transiting the sign, but it sort of becomes active. And so we see the things that we associate with Saturn in Pisces really happening at the time. And that's when Saturn makes important connections to the personal planets, or when I've mentioned the Saturn-Jupiter cycle for another time. But there's also when the Sun conjoins Saturn, which it will do on the 26th of February, and then when it will square Saturn, when it will oppose Saturn, and also when it turns stationary retrograde and when it turns stationary direct. And I'm sort of going to give you these dates so that you can pop them in your little notebook or whatever, and just observe yourself what Saturnian messages are being given out generally to the world in terms of global situations, and also in your own life as well, what things are popping up. So certainly the 26th of February is a big one. Then we come to the 8th and 9th of June. In fact, really almost the 8th through to the 12th or 13th of June. It's a really, really big period of the year. We've got the Sun and Venus squaring Saturn and Mercury squaring Saturn. So we've got 3 personal planets angled to Saturn. And at the same time, we've got another Mars-Pluto square. And if you want to know about Mars and Pluto, let's just go back to the week beginning the 12th of February. And we were in the aura of Mars and Pluto, and such a lot of distressing, disturbing events then. And by the way, I'm speaking as though it's in the past tense, but actually I am recording this on a Sunday, the 11th of February. So I have yet to be able to label it precisely, but we are living in really very difficult times. So the 29th of June, Saturn turns stationary retrograde, another period for you to note. And then we come to the 19th of August. I've talked about this in my Friday Bite, this last one. And I've never quite seen such a constellation at that point. We've got everything but the kitchen sink happening on one day and a full moon, but Saturn's in there. We've got Venus opposing Saturn, Mars squaring Saturn, and Jupiter squaring Saturn. So we have everything that I've been talking about so far, all the themes I've covered, everything from constitutional matters, everything from leadership change, floods, genocides, all the things that I've mentioned in regard to Saturn. That's a really important point. And it just happens to be the date of the Democratic Convention. So I'll leave that to another time, but I'm just going to dangle that little cherry in front of you. So the 8th of September, Sun opposition Saturn. 15th of November, Saturn stationary direct. And then the 4th of December, Sun square Saturn. So those are all really, really important Saturnian periods and times when you're seeing Saturn in full flood, so to speak. But now let's take a look at the astrology in terms of what it's looking like in chart form, and I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that. So here we go. Here we have the circle of the horoscope, and I've set it for the 24th of February, which is full moon day. And really just because I just wanted to look at it like that. And of course, when I take you through sign by sign, we'll see it a little bit clearer as well. And as you can see, there's this tight little cluster of planets. They're all in that bundle shape. So it's very intense. There is no leeway, no relaxation. It's as tense as you can get. And on the full moon day, we have the moon opposition. The center of that bundle shaping is opposition the sun, which in turn is close to Saturn. And you can see how that buildup is happening. Mercury approaching the sun. And by the time you get to the 26th, we've got a sun-Saturn conjunction. And we can also see quite nicely, if we look at this map, we can see Jupiter at 10 of Taurus in the kind of 11 o'clock position. So this configuration, this full moon conjunct Saturn, Mercury conjuncted as well, has some relief here from Jupiter. It's almost as though good things come out of a crisis. And maybe that's something worth remembering when you get towards this particular day. If we look back and we see those planets at kind of 2 o'clock of the clock face, we can see Pluto in Aquarius and Mars and Venus having just passed it. They're on their way to connect with Saturn. So as you can see, this tight little constellation of planets, all the personal planets there, you know, and it is going to be such a decisive period, whether it's in your lives or whether we're just sort of talking generally. And the last thing I want to draw your attention to in this particular chart is the presence of Chiron. Here we are at 12 noon on the chart, almost exactly conjunct the North Node. And if we know that Chiron is about an existential pain, something we can't fix, the idea that it's on the eclipse form is going to reveal aspects of our existence that we simply can't fix, that appear to be unfixable. Now, it doesn't mean they are unfixable, but at this particular time, they will appear like that. So we have a lot of things going on in different countries, different leaders with different crises, as well as our own. But the overarching feeling is that we're dealing with something we can't seem to fix. So I want to come back now to you, and we'll go through it sign by sign so we can see a little bit more clearly what the dynamics are, and we can get something personal out of it. But before I do this, 2 things to say to you. First of all, I do it really, and I'm showing you from the perspective of your sun sign. So if you know nothing else other than you're a Cancerian or a Sagittarian, you know to listen when I come to Sagittarius. But of course, if you know your rising sign and you know the degree of your rising sign, you'll know exactly where these planets are, where the full moon is, where everything is. and you'll be able to take that interpretation, whatever is appropriate, from all 12 signs that I'll be doing. I tend to like the sun sign quite a lot because I get under the skin of a sun sign and kind of treat it in the character that you would look at this particular set of configurations. But either way is fine by me. And last but not least, those of you who are new to my channel, I've got a book. It's called The Art of Interpretation, and it's all about interpreting a natal chart in the simplest way possible. And that's a nice little book to have it to hand, because I do get quite technical with my astrology. And if you have some of the basics there in just this little handbook form, it's going to be much easier to understand. So no more ado, let's get on with it. And we're going to look at Pisces first of all. So here we have the sun in Pisces, conjunct Saturn, and we can see Mercury there as well. And I've drawn the moon in very faintly because, yes, at full moon, we're going to feel this whole setup with Saturn. You're going to feel or guess what it means. And I think, especially with Saturn, you can really feel the heaviness sometimes with that, even if you make a good decision, even if things are consolidated and you reach a satisfactory conclusion around this time of the 26th, 24th of February, it's going to feel like it's heavy. But of course, sometimes things look a lot worse than they really are when we've got a strong Saturnian influence. So bear this in mind, Pisces, especially if it's your birthday. I mean, if your birthday, you want balloons and birthday cake and lovely things happening. But here we are with Saturn in tow. I mean, he's like the grumpy old uncle that sits at the back of the room going, you're all going to suffer from this. So it's like that. The atmosphere is like that. But what is it also saying? It's saying, you know, this is a time of coming to knowledge. I rather like that phrase. So that you're also coming into your age as well. Whatever age you are, whether you're 21 or 57 or 72, you know, whatever your age, the Sun-Saturn conjunction is a sort of recognition of the age you are. And there is the celebration for the idea that you've come through so much and you've understood so much, you've acquired so much knowledge and experience. That's a celebration. But at the same time, there's a sense that you can't have that time again, and you are getting older. And Saturn does make us feel our age. So don't be surprised, Pisces, if you really feel your age around this time, especially if you've got a birthday in that late February period. But just generally with Saturn in the, you know, in the sphere of Pisces, there is a real sense of your limitations. And it's good to know your limitations. It's good to know that you can't fly. You know, no one can fly unless you get in a plane, right? And it's no point saying, I want to fly and I'm going to try to develop some wings. So there are certain things, certain rationalizations we need to come to when Saturn is in the mix, as it is here for you. And what we've got to remember is, as I showed you when we looked at the big horoscope, that Saturn is actually in harmony with Jupiter and Uranus. So there are going to be things that come out of the difficulties that you're facing at this time, Pisces. And they're going to be good things, but you're not there yet. You have to wait until they happen. So it's going to be very important as you go through the year from now, especially as we get to the time when all those things are happening in the August, just before the sun comes into your opposite sign of Virgo. There's going to be a real kind of sense of the events that are happening at this time are also going to be playing into the events that happen in about 6 months' time. And it may have to do with a relationship, because we're looking at the relationship axis here in your solar chart, or if you've got Pisces rising, then we are looking, especially with that full moon, at the idea of a part a relationship will have to play with your personal evolution, with the rationalizations you have to make. it's a time when you'll be ready to make a commitment or ready to drop a commitment. These are all these big life milestones that happen when Saturn is in your sign, and when we're looking at the planets moving around your chart and opposing. In this case, we're looking briefly at the full moon, but also that Jupiter-Uranus setup is in the third solar house. And so we get the idea that an outlook, a change of outlook, whether that means literally moving, so you get a new look through your window, but what it really means is getting a new take on your life, on the things that are in your life. And with that comes release and new directions and all of that. It's a very personal thing for you, Pisces, and maybe as we look at this Sun-Saturn conjunction, you will be looking at yourself sourly. You may see all your faults and none of your virtues. Fix what you can, but you might find just as we go through, we come out the other side of Pisces in the middle, around about the 20th of March, that suddenly you kind of think, why did I think that wasn't working? Or why did I feel so bad about myself at that time? I feel much better now. But remember, the secret is in the outlook. It's changing your outlook. It's moving your space, changing your space. That's going to make all the difference to those Saturn realities that you meet. And yet they've got to be dealt with. We've got to deal with reality when Saturn's in play. And that's a message being delivered long and loud last year and this year going forward. And it's going to feel particularly intense at the times when Saturn is joined by the personal planets. And I've given you those dates and times in the overview before we got here. So yeah, it's time to step up to the plate, Pisces. It's time to accept certain limitations, but also to recognize with age comes wisdom, and that in a sense, you are also acquiring gravitas. You know, becoming a person of depth and strength. And that's the thing to be celebrated. So we come now to Aries, and we look at where all these, where Saturn is. It's in your 12th house. And of course, I've been talking all about the processing and the dissolution that goes on with Pisces, Saturn in Pisces. That's just a general theme. Everything I've talked about, the idea of atonement, this is going on, particularly for Sun Arians and those of you with Aries rising. It is really, really strong. And it's hard sometimes being an Aries because this is a sign that is very pioneering, is very upfront and very outspoken, and doesn't always take a long, long time to think about actions and words. And so often that creates problems for Aries because you've put your foot in it. You've made a slip. So this is very important to look back on things that you might have said in the past, or actions that you might have taken that have really affected other people and not in a happy way. And you don't have to beat yourself up about it. This is the important thing, Aries. No one's asking you to beat yourself up. It's just that you have to think about it, and you have to think, put yourself in that person's shoes or everything that happened. And from that perspective, start thinking, oh, yes, that might have been a bad idea. And if it does involve someone, maybe there is a point in going to that person and apologizing, or just saying, I didn't realize the consequences of my actions, and I'm incredibly sorry. But it's something you can do on your own as well. As I said a little bit earlier in the overview, you don't have to go before a judge and jury. You are your own judge and jury. That's an important process. There's nothing more important, Aries, than tying up loose ends while Saturn is in Pisces. Let's get everything attended to. Let's look at health. Let's look at the things that aren't where they should be. Is it what you're eating? Is it the lack of exercise? Is it that you need new treatments for something? Because to deal with it now with Saturn in Pisces, before Saturn gets into Aries, is the time to do it, even if it means some kind of sacrifice. Good old Piscean word. Give something up if it's going to help you be fitter, stronger, and better. And have the courage to face your fears. You know, what is it that you're worried about in yourself? You know, health-wise, dental-wise, work-wise, whatever it is, whatever your fears, Aries, confront them, do something about them. Because if you just ignore them and cross your fingers and toes and say, oh, it's going to be all right, you know, no, it's not. When Saturn comes into Aries, you'll be dealing with the consequences of not having taken action. So my advice to you, Aries, is deal with it now. Deal with it in an upfront way. If there's something you have to do that's going to take you a very long time, or something that's just hard work to do it now. Start it now. Why not on that Sun-Saturn conjunction? Get some symbolism behind it. Because once you make a start, you're on your way to finishing it. So whatever it is, and it's going to be different from Aries to Aries, you need to do that. And as I said, you know, with health, if you need to give something up, if you need to do something that will better your health, start it, do it, and do it with commitment. You know, this idea really of the 12th house, and with the Saturn in Pisces, this is for you if you're a Sun Aries or you've got Aries rising. There is this old version of this 12th house. I use the phrase, the house of secrets and shadows, which I think does it nicely. But it's also the house of secret enemies. And I know in the original days when we, you know, when astrology was being, well, it's been evolving for centuries, but secret enemies often meant people who would do you down, real physical people. But now we tend to look at secret enemies as being those things that are preventing you from living a decent life, from having things, you know, be what you want them to be. You all sorts of addictions or behaviors, and they're your secret enemies. It's facing your secret enemies every bit as much as it's facing your fears. And often they're the two, aren't they? And Saturn also is about weaknesses, where we're not so strong. And we have to face Saturn. We have to say, okay, I'm in this Saturn masterclass now, and I've got to deal with all of this because I'm going to be cleansed. And when I'm going to come out of that, I'm going to be fitter, better, stronger, a better Aries, a better version of myself on my way to being my best self. Okay, but yeah, that period, February through March, as the sun moves through the 12th house, you may not be feeling tremendous, whether you're just not feeling tremendous, not 100% well, or whether you've suddenly got an attack of the grumps and the blues. It will pass, Aries. But as I said, grab something by the throat, you know, look at something and say, I've got to deal with this. And I promise you, you'll be working with Saturn, not against him. Okay, so let's move on to Taurus. And Taurus, for you, Saturn is currently in the 11th house. And I know in my year aheads, which I know a lot of you have got, I find myself talking about Saturn in the 11th house for you. And actually, I think it's also for, it might also be for Gemini as well. No, Saturn is in the 10th house. Well, wherever I was addressing Saturn in the 11th house, because I did it for, you know, its previous position as well, is that this is all about group consciousness. The 11th house is about the collective. It's about collaborations. It's about, you know, that higher level of consciousness. It's not personal anymore. It's collective, and it's a higher state of being, if you like, where you have to cut out the ego, you have to cut out the person in there and work for the benefit of the group, work as a team to get a result. You have to discover the value of friendship. You have to discover the value of things that require a group to bring it off. And with Saturn in there, it becomes a struggle, doesn't it? It's both something you've got to do, but so often when Saturn's moving through this area, you discover that you have become the shadow of a group. So this can happen at work. You know, suddenly, maybe you work in an office and suddenly everybody is not really addressing you, or, you know, they don't value you, or they, you know, maybe even blaming you for everything that's going on. That's Saturn in the 11th house. And there are a couple of ways of working with this. You can either recognize that it's not personal. You become the shadow, but actually your job is to sort of learn how to handle this. You know, it's rough being the shadow. It really is, being the one that doesn't seem to be gelling with the rest of the group, or the person who seems to be doing everything wrong. It's hard, that position. It's really hard. But if you can find dignity in that, if you can learn from it and accept that this is the way it is for the time, and there's something to be learned from this portal you're going through, then it becomes valuable. But you have the option to leave as well. The only problem with standing up for yourself kind of thing and saying, I don't deserve this at all, and I'm not happy, I'm not comfortable, you don't like me, then I don't like you, and leaving a friendship even for that reason, is that you're only going to meet up with it again, because until Saturn has finished its journey through the 11th house, its journey in this part through Pisces, then you're going to keep coming up with it in different forms, in different areas. And so I do favor this idea of learning how to handle unfair treatment, difficulties, being sent to Coventry, being isolated, being unappreciated. You have to find the dignity of self in that. You can't insist on it. You can't put yourself onto others and blag about yourself and assert your ego. That you can't do. But it is in finding a sense of who you still are and who you know you are in amidst these occasions and these times when you've suddenly become the person everybody blames, or the person for whom everything goes wrong. And that's quite a tough one, I think, Taurus. Although, of course, right now, you have Jupiter in your sign, which is giving you a lot of jollies. It's sort of helping you to make progress and to feel good about life and to add to your life. And we see that nice balance between the Saturn and Jupiter in this case. And you can think, well, that nice balance there does mean that if I really work with this well enough, I can actually benefit from it. This is going to be of great benefit. And if we look at the 11th house for enterprise as well, maybe you have to struggle with your own business, or struggle to start some endeavor, that still requires other people. But it's through that struggle and the things that you're learning that eventually you make huge benefits. By the way, when we're looking at this full moon, which is on the 24th of February, it's on the axis of gestation. So a gestation period is over and something is about to be born, whether we're looking at real life little people or some kind of project or something to do with a relationship. That might be quite interesting, given everything I've just been talking about in regard to Saturn and this Saturn position and now the full moon. So on to Gemini. Now Saturn for you is in a very important area of your horoscope. It's right up in the 10th house, right at the top of your chart. And that has everything to do with your place in the world, or your place on the world's stage. And that means different things for different Geminis. For some of you, it is all about a job or a position you hold in a company. And so you can relate it very easily to your role in life that way. But there's also roles in life which are to do with being a mother, for being a spouse. There are all sorts of roles we take on: helper, healer, confidant. There are all sorts of roles. So the 10th house is all about that. And with Saturn there, it means that the more likely manifestation of Saturn here is that you have struggle with your role, so that you're not getting the promotions that you want. You might even lose your job. And it seems as though at one time you were the flavor of the month, and now you are absolutely not the flavor of the month anymore. And you really can't seem to get back there. You can't get back up to your position where you seem to be popular, or you seem to be doing well, or things were going well for you. You're having to learn what it's like to still be the same person, still have the same gifts and talents, but yet not to be recognized for them. And that's really the most likely manifestation of Saturn working through your 10th house. And when we look at the Sun and Mercury conjoining it on the, the full moon on the 24th, and eventually Mars and Venus also going over that Saturn, then this is going to be a period where you might feel that you are unrecognized, and maybe you've had to take a step back, or you've had to accept something that you didn't want to accept. It's very hard. Now, occasionally Saturn will work in the other way. Remember, I was talking about crystallization, creating a beautiful form out of Saturn. And what Saturn can bring is responsibility, but good responsibility. Suddenly you're the head of a company. Suddenly you're the one where the buck stops, and your leadership and your ability to influence situations, other people's lives, is great. So you've got the mantle of responsibility on your shoulders. And this is going to be a real testing point for that mantle of responsibility as we get towards the end of February. But remember, I've given you a whole string of other dates in the overview. Look at those dates, because those are all junctions. Those are all test points for everything that I'm talking about in terms of your place in the world. Now, when we look at that idea of the place in the world, and its most easy and accessible way of looking at it is our career. When we think about how we were brought up, we were born, we went to school, we had parents, or we had people who were in charge of us, like guardians, whoever those parental figures were. And through their influence, we understood where we were headed in life. We were educated and told to get a degree in finance because that's going to stand you in good stead, or, whatever it was that your parental figures guided you in is the direction that where you are now. But it can have, with Saturn in the 10th house as it is now, and then we start to see these big connections going to it, that is something to do with your parents. Whether, you have to take responsibility for your parents become a responsibility. That's something else to play around with when we look at Saturn going through Pisces and in the 10th house of your solar chart. Again, I think there's a lot to be gained from understanding the trials and tribulations that Saturn will bring inevitably, the learning curves Saturn is going to force you through. One of the great helps of this is in things like meditation and in yoga and in spiritual practices. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that because of the connection between Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus in your 12th house. So let's come on to Cancer. And we look at Saturn in Pisces for you in the 9th house of your solar chart. Or if you've got Cancer rising, Saturn is moving through the 9th house. Now, it's in the sign of Pisces, and Pisces is another water sign like yourself. So there is an instinctive harmony here. And it still doesn't lessen the fact that Saturn is bringing lessons, but it's somehow easier to bear. And the 9th house has a lot to do with understanding. It has a lot to do with education. It has a lot to do with travel in terms of miles, as well as traveling in the mind and acquiring a deeper knowledge of various things, of studying, for instance. So in a way, you think, well, Saturn isn't like Jupiter. If Jupiter was here, you'd be going on your travels, you'd be in a period of learning, which was a joy. Well, with Saturn, it's not a joy, is it? So we think of our journeys, whether they're journeys in miles or journeys in knowledge and experience, as being hard work. There's nothing light about Saturn. You're going to work hard. But, that cliche, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And it is so true. And there's a great point to knowing when Saturn is going through your 9th house that it is a really, really good time to acquire knowledge that may give you qualifications of some sort, extra skills so that you can then go out in the world and you can be successful, you know, for when Saturn comes to your 10th house, you can take what you've learned, take what you know, and use it and benefit from it. So you need to keep thinking while Saturn is in the 9th house, what can I do that's going to benefit me going forward? And it also has a lot to do with your life plan in a way. It's the 9th house is where we think about, oh, where do I want to be in 5, 10, 20 years' time? Is it a place? Is it a situation? Is it a state of being? And when Saturn is moving through this 9th house, it shows you how far off you are from achieving that. Where you are now, you will never achieve what you want. So it's saying, get your ducks in a row. Do things that will put you on a trajectory that's right for you. So a lot of things that will be happening at this time, when the Sun and Mercury are on Saturn and the moon, the full moon is opposing it. And of course, there's other junctions of the year that I've talked about in the overview, other dates I've given you. And these are times when you can take a giant leap forward in a way of understanding and setting things in place that you need to have in place. But they're also reality checks and times when you may be disappointed because you haven't got the results you wanted. Things haven't panned out that way. Your journeys have been painful. And when you've reached your destination, you're not happy about where you've reached. So it's back to the drawing board. It's redrawing the map in some way. But it's also part, like the 9th house, the 12th house, the 6th house and the 3rd house, they're all about, well, they're what I call the seeking houses. So there's something about the 9th house that's about, I suppose, really seeking to understand why you're here and the kind of framework for you in terms of your knowledge, your spiritual understanding, your consciousness, your awareness of the world, your awareness of your place in the world. So in many ways, Saturn in the 9th house is a good place for you, but it's by no means, you know, wall-to-wall sunshine. You know, Saturn is Saturn. Saturn's got leaden boots on. And sure enough, there are going to be some failures and struggles and awakenings and realizations to be made. And as I said, this is particularly characteristic of this end of February period. So we come to the Sun in Leo. Then we have Saturn moving through the 8th house. And what a complex area this is. I mean, you had Saturn going through your opposite sign of Aquarius from 2021, and that, you know, taught you everything you needed to know about relationships and other people. And in a way, it hasn't really stopped, because now you're learning of the effects of all of that. And I know a lot of Leos split up from their partners, or they left companies. And so a lot of things came to an end with Saturn moving through the 7th house in terms of commitments and relationships. Now, as Saturn moves through the 8th house, it's like, what do you get out of all that? What happened as a result of those relationships, whether you formed a relationship and you're now fully understanding what the structure of that relationship is about, the responsibilities of that relationship, the drawbacks of that relationship, or you've come out of a relationship and now you've realized the cost of coming out of a relationship. So that's a sort of big theme with Saturn in Pisces for you, because it's Saturn in the 8th house. Now, another thing that, you know, when we think about Saturn, it's often more likely when Saturn crosses our sun or crosses our ascendant that we sort of feel our age, and we feel, you know, disenchanted with life, with ourselves, and less than hopeful about the future. We see the negatives in everything. But there's something about the 8th house as well that makes us aware of the length of our lives. We become aware suddenly that life is short. And I think a lot of Leos may even have found themselves saying that life is short. And that means you've got to get on with it. But, you know, sometimes before we can get on with enjoying and doing the things that we've hoped to do and the things we want to achieve, there's got to be a lot of tying up of loose ends. And of course, Saturn in Pisces is all about that. And a lot of it for you is tying up loose financial ends. So there's a lot of stuff to be realized and recognized with finances, especially in relationship with others. So that in a partnership, you have responsibilities, both of you, to the partnership in terms of finance. But we have partnerships with credit card companies and banks and mortgage lenders, all of that kind of thing. So Saturn in 8th house, through the 8th house as it is now, is going to bring many realities to bear, and they're not going to be comfortable. And it's also perhaps the error of your own ways, perhaps with not planning very well for your future in terms of finance, or perhaps taking shortcuts or all sorts of things you thought, oh, well, my partner will sort that out, or I will get that from the company when they settle my retirement. It's all these things, the realizations that money isn't going to be there. And that should give rise to other alternatives for you. It shouldn't be seen as something you can't get over or get past. But this particular period may show you the weaknesses in your financial planning and the limitations in your partners and your ability to have a solid financial ship. We're now beginning to see the leaks where they are, and they have to be strengthened. And also this idea that life is short. Sometimes it's embracing that fact that is interesting. And if you have friends who have passed away, or maybe people that you've known, even famous people dying, people who may be of your age, it certainly brings home to you the idea of, that death is final. Is it or is it not? And then there's a whole understanding of the framework with which passing and life being over, and sometimes facing it, looking at it, thinking about your funeral plan. This is not a bad thing. Writing a will, all of this thing, no matter how old you are, these are things that Saturn going through the 8th house is encouraging through one reason or the other. And yes, things might feel particularly harsh at the time of the, towards the end of February, but it's harsh for good reason. You need to know the reality. Once you know the reality, you can move on. Now, Virgo, Sun in Virgo, Virgo rising. Now, for you, Saturn in Pisces means it's going through the 7th house of relationships. Or if you've got Virgo rising, Saturn is moving through the 7th house. So we've got an extended period to really understand everything you needed to know about Saturn and more. For some Virgos, Saturn is going to help you make the ties that bind. You are going to be marrying, or you are going to be getting into a business partnership, signing contracts with a company or a group. So it's a big commitment for you with other people. That's very Saturnian, and it's a good thing. But so too can Saturn say, this is not working. This relationship is not working. Whether you're feeling rejected by someone, or you're feeling you're carrying the burden of your partner in a relationship. Maybe your partner is going through a very, very difficult time, and you're having to bear the burden of the relationship almost entirely on your shoulders. And that can be taxing, isn't it? It's not nice to be with someone who's going through a bad time, because they may be grumpy and they may be acting out, and they're not necessarily nice to be with. But while Saturn is in the 7th house, I'm afraid that's your role. It's your role to be the stronger partner. It's your role to bear the burden of a relationship. However, Saturn may also be revealing to you during the course of time it's going through Pisces that some relationships are done. Their shelf life is done, and a relationship will reach its natural end. And sad as that may be, it does open a new chapter of your life. And that chapter can be absolutely wonderful, but it's going through the portal of pain as a relationship ends. That's really, really difficult. And this full moon towards the end of February could be a time when a lot of relationships and the stresses and strains of a relationship feel at their most harsh, and you will be tempted to give up. Maybe that is the right thing to do. Whereas for a lot of other Virgos and Virgo rising, it's really the reverse, and you're ready to sign up. You're ready for partnership. You are ready for that. And in general, Saturn's passage through the seventh house, it's showing you the impact other people have on your life, what you can learn from them, even if they're delivering some very bad, hard lessons. It's learning from those lessons and how other people can be, that in turn is helping you become stronger, helping, grist to your mill. And you see a lot of projection when Saturn is in the seventh house. A lot of things that you're meeting or not liking in other people are aspects of yourself that you can't deal with, you don't like, you don't recognize. And so you're being forced to deal with them in someone else. So again, it's having a good look at ourselves. Right? I talked about atonement earlier. It's a great theme of Saturn in Pisces. It's sort of time to look at your role and the way your actions have effects on others. And that's the purpose of someone giving you a hard time. But let's not forget the idea that things can be very fruitful with Saturn as well. So on to Libra. And Libra for you, Saturn is in the sixth house. It's been there since March the 7th of last year. And already when I talk to a lot of Librans or people with Libra rising, there's been two very distinct versions of Saturn's transit of this area. They've either had nothing but work. Life is work. It's relentless. 9 till 5, forget it. It's 9 till 10, in the evening. People are working harder than they've ever worked before who have Libra rising or are Sun Librans. But it's also that even if you're not working harder than you've ever worked before, the circumstances surrounding your work are Saturnian. They're heavy going. You don't like your co-workers. They're being difficult. They're not productive. You're the one who's, really having to take most of the responsibility when it comes to, working in the workplace. Yet at the same time, Saturn is saying, you know what? You come of age with Saturn, and sometimes your hard work comes to fruition. In other words, you get promotion, you achieve. And I often find in the sixth house that, sometimes we go out into the world and we do a job, and other people sort of promote us, or they give us more money, or they like us, whatever. But yet the people who are our peers never have a good word to say about us. And so we find our peer group in the sixth house as well. So maybe, Libra, what's going on is that even if you feel you're working hard, even if you feel that you're getting somewhere, albeit slowly, what you're not getting is cooperation, support, approval, and applause from your peers. And it's a question, really, of doing without it, letting it not, damage your own, work ethic or anything. It's doing it in spite of no approval from your peer group, no appreciation from your peer group. And generally that theme of lack of appreciation goes through a sixth house transit of Saturn, is that the things you do for other people, they don't seem to be rewarded. You're not getting your jollies for having devoted time and effort and care to people. It's like they don't think it's anything. They don't value what you've done. And I think because the sixth house has so much to do with our life purpose, Saturn is urging you, or you feel that you're questioning what you're doing. Is this right? Is this really what I'm meant to do? you know, because I feel that I should be, you know, be of benefit to others in my life, that my life purpose has to do with other people and being of service to other people. Yet the more I do, the less it seems to work, the less I feel I get from it. But it's just moving through it. It's keeping on, keeping on. That's exactly what Saturn is demanding. Although at the same time, you may think of making adjustments. If your life is relentless work, it's relentless, it's the same thing day in, day out, there's no light and shade, nothing. You have to create a new routine. You have to do something to change that so that you let the light in, so that you make for change. Yes, maybe there is a need to work all the hours that, you know, are available, but you could section off some time for just joy, other people, whatever it is. It gives you a break. So your routines need looking at. You've got locked into some kind of routine that's not healthy. And speaking of health, Saturn in the 6th house has a lot to do with your health. And so chronic, you know, conditions are likely to feel more chronic. It's almost like, I can't put up with this any longer. It will pass and you will find new treatments. But often with Saturn in the 6th house, it's saying, look, you are not helping yourself. You are definitely not helping. So it's time to look at what you're doing, what you're eating, what your lifestyle is, what your exercise is, what your routines are. How is your system running? Because Saturn is saying, I don't think it's working too well. So there's a lot of good work that can be done with Saturn in the 6th if you get over yourself, if you don't mind my saying that. You know, put your shoulder to the wheel. Get on with it, learn about it, do it. It's not going to last forever. That's a good way to work with Saturn, but let's not forget that at the end of February, it's going to feel really intense and you're going to feel the stresses, the strains, the lack of approval, the lack of support from your peers or the people you are of service to. Pass through it, move through it. This is a Saturn cycle. So now we come to Scorpio. And, you know, Scorpio, Saturn is in Pisces, as you know, it's what this video is all about. But Pisces is a fellow water sign, and there is an instinctive harmony here. Now, it doesn't mean that Saturn for you is always, you know, wall-to-wall sunshine because it's in this nice sign of Pisces, which is your fellow water sign. No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that there is some kind of sense of harmony. And you're going to find that in different ways in different situations. The 5th house, where Saturn is moving through, is the creative center of the horoscope. Your inner child resides in the 5th house. And what does the inner child like to do? It wants to play. It wants to feel joy. It wants to put its offerings out there and have them applauded. And, you know, and you feel, oh, I'm just great. I'm having a great time. Isn't it all wonderful? And if you think back to when you were a child, how you enjoyed play. Play was the best thing, wasn't it? Playing with your friends, however play was. And that inner child still lives within you, but you're an adult. So there are other forms of play, aren't there? There's things that you enjoy doing without thinking, and they give you a lot of pleasure. It can be quite sporty as well. I mean, there's a lot of sport that you can do that goes with the activities of a 5th house. And of course, you can get creative. And you can be creative in every which way, whether it's creative with paints and canvas or with writing, or you can be, you know, procreative. You can produce a child, or you can have a lot to do with babies and children. So Saturn moving through this area is a funny one, isn't it? Because at once we're sort of looking at the idea of structure and consolidation, which sort of says, oh, you're going to get something out of your creative efforts. It's going to be a solid result. But it takes time. And I think particularly those of you who are creative and you've got a project and you want to get it off the ground, maybe you've got a business you want to start, it's going to be slow. You're not always going to get where you want to get when you want to get there. It's the same with getting pregnant. it's going to be a bit of an effort is required. And maybe you feel you'll never have a baby or will never happen. Well, maybe some realities will have to be faced while Saturn moves through the 5th house. Maybe you'll have to adopt, or maybe you'll, remarry, and now you have a whole fleet of stepchildren, to parent. There's all ways around this idea of creativity, procreativity, offspring. But Saturn is playing a tune in this area. And as I said, it's at a nice angle to your sun sign of Scorpio. And of course, it's connecting nicely with Jupiter in Taurus and also eventually Uranus in Taurus. So it sort of says, the efforts you go through are so rewarding. Eventually, you'll get that reward. And maybe a relationship is going to be part of that story because that's where Jupiter is. And that other people can be an enormous help. Your teachers in some way can be an enormous help with all these creative difficulties and delays that you run into with Saturn. But the achievements that come with Saturn in the 5th house are great. And you can feel, I've arrived, I've achieved all my efforts, I've achieved this, it's a solid result. And sometimes, of course, a love affair or a relationship that's been quite casual can now become something very committed. So that also is a possibility as Saturn works its way through Pisces and your 5th house. Yes, it's going to feel a little bit overwhelming towards the end of February. And of course, all those other times I've mentioned in the overview when Saturn is going to come out and either reward you or show you where you've fallen short, one of the two. And this is a big one. This is a real point of awareness. It's a point of reflection and review, and maybe also of looking at some aspects of what you want and what you do, and realizing, it's either the wrong way to go about it, or maybe you need to have something very different. Saturn is all about realities and facing realities. Sagittarius. Saturn for you is in the 4th house. Well, this is not the easiest of placements for Saturn. And of course, you've got Neptune in there as well, although it's on its way out. And I think with Saturn in the 4th house, we sort of feel somehow inadequate. I don't know, anything that you've struggled with as a child, anything that became difficult as you were going through childhood, before you became an adult, so to speak. Those things are sort of playing into your situation now. And, I talked about atonement in, the first part of this video, and I looked at the idea of going back into the past and realizing where things have gone wrong or where you performed an action that you really need to process and maybe atone for. It's looking into your past and your childhood and even your parents. And maybe it's your parents' mistakes or your parents not providing enough for you, or somehow your parents blocking you, that's coming back to haunt you at this time. And dealing with that is the pain, isn't it? I mean, when we're little, for the most part, we feel our parental figures are like gods, don't we? We love them unconditionally. We accept our parents unconditionally. Now, as soon as we hit adolescence, that all starts to change. And by the time we are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, we're seeing as our parents as very real people with all flaws and failings. And it may be that this is one of the journeys you'll be making with Saturn in Pisces. And when we think about the configuration that's coming up at the end of February, and we look at those other times that I pointed out earlier in my video, that whole issue with your parents, maybe it's recognizing that you don't need to follow your parents. Maybe the examples they set you and the programming they put into you is inappropriate for the you who you are. Your childhood was actually not conducive to the person you are now and the person you want to be. And it's coming to terms with that without feeling guilty about it. You know, you are not your parents. But it may also be in other cases the fact that parents only did what they thought was best or what they knew. They could do nothing more than what they knew. And for that, there needs to be understanding and acceptance. And so it is about the family. But it can also be about the home in reality as well. So that it's difficult to get a mortgage, it's difficult to pay your mortgage, it's difficult to find somewhere to live. So that's the struggle that Saturn is presenting you with. But it can also be the people you're living with. If you're living in shared accommodation, or even your family you're living with, it's just pressure. What about having young children? We all know how difficult that can be. I mean, you know, it's endless. You're on duty endlessly with children, never sleeping. And so that may play into why Saturn moving through the fourth is making you feel weary of your domestic conditions. So I've given you some ideas of how to look at this. It's a short term of trial compared with your whole life. It's 2 and a bit years of your whole life. So moving through this 2 years and out the other side, you're going to have benefited a lot from this transit. It won't have been fun all the time. Although what you struggle with, even if it is to do with a mortgage or getting a home or getting better conditions within your home base, you're going to come out with a sense of having really worked it and having put in the work. And that means that you can go forward from there. Okay, Sagittarius. So let's now come to Capricorn. And Saturn, of course, for you is your ruling planet. You are Saturn. You embody Saturn. You are the rock of ages. You are the rock for everyone to rest on. You are the provider. You are the one everyone else expects to handle things while life is falling apart from them, or falling apart for them. So we look now at Saturn in Pisces, actually quite a nice angle to Capricorn. It's in the 3rd house. This has a lot to do with perception, other people's perception of you, and your perception of your small world and the bigger world. We learn a lot about the world with Saturn in the 3rd house. And we also learn a lot, I mean, which may coincide with a period of intense study. You may be working your way towards a qualification, or you've opted to take a study course, or you're at that period of your life where you're taking tests. You know, maybe you're a student and you've got a degree course you're on, or maybe, you know, part of while Saturn's in the 3rd house is getting your driving test. And I know certainly in England, it's very difficult to get a driving test these days. The backlog is huge. So there's all sorts of ways you could look at Saturn in the 3rd and see that there will be tests of some description while it's going through there. We might also want to look at this area of the chart. It has a lot to do with our neighborhood and also our siblings. I know this is really weird, isn't it? But it is really about those things that are in our immediate environment, those things that we live with all the time, or we've grown up with, and you know, they're sort of part and parcel of us. And it's our relationship with them, how we look at them and how they look at us, and how we work with them and how they work with us. So when you think about your neighborhood, what's going on in your neighborhood with Saturn in the 3rd house is a great big skyscraper coming up in your back garden. I know that happens somewhere in England. I think it's in Nottingham. Suddenly a factory appeared in the back garden because the planning permission had been sent to a different part of the town. So it can be a real physical impediment that your outlook is now not what it was. But it's a metaphor as well. It's about your outlook not looking great, in fact, looking more grey than anything. Now, sometimes that's a good thing because we have to learn to live with the greys, don't we? I'm even wearing grey, and how nice that grey is. You know, greys can be nice, although obviously we want yellows and pinks and turquoise and amethyst. We want these great bright colors in life. But sometimes you have to live with the grays. And there can be a certain beauty in gray. And maybe it's learning to look at those situations and even looking out on your small world and your bigger world and seeing its reality without it being set in a beautiful light. And you know what? Accepting it. Accepting the reality of it. It's also about your ideas not necessarily meeting with a lot of, enthusiasm. So if you work in a field where you're creative and you have to put ideas out there, it's like the ideas you come up with, everyone says, nah, I don't like it. And even when you're working with your family or with your significant other or whatever, you come up with things you want to do and you get a big fat no, we don't agree with you. We don't think we're on the same page here. So it can mean that you're constantly feeling that what you see and your outlook and what you want to say is somehow constricted. Your voice is not being heard. It's not getting out there. And if it is, it's being misunderstood. It's falling on dead ears. You have to work it. Maybe there are new ways to deliver your message. Maybe there are new ways to look or create a different way of looking at the world. And Saturn is asking you to be constructive, not to be negative. And there could be some, you could be up against some hurdles here, Capricorn, especially if you are studying. You may not pass that test. You may find that your qualifications aren't enough, but it's keeping on, keeping on. And perhaps when we look at the way Saturn is angled by Jupiter, certainly at the moment, and eventually Uranus as well, we think somehow that maybe you need to diversify a bit. Sometimes the whole rules and regulations, tradition, old ways of doing things get in the way of your progress, Capricorn. And maybe it's throwing out the old book and thinking about new ways to look at situations, to go back to the drawing board, but with a fresh outlook. Okay. Last, but absolutely not least, Aquarius. So Aquarius, you've got Pluto in your sign. We could see it there as we look at the horoscope here. And if you've got Aquarius rising, well, the first degree of Aquarius rising, you've got Pluto in your first house. So we know that's the main story. It's all about transformation. But Saturn has to be acknowledged. It's in your chart, and for you, it's in the second house. And that is the area where we think about self-worth. And when we think about how much we're worth, that can be measured by if we own a house or if we have money in the bank or, whatever, we've got investments, property. And we think, oh, that's how much I'm worth. I can actually add it up on paper and those are my assets. That's what I'm worth. But we have other assets, don't we? We have our talents. We have our very being. So Saturn moving through this area of self-worth puts a big mirror up and says, are you really doing well? Are you really who you think you are? Are you really what you say you are? Are you really who you're cracked up to be? And it can also be a time when we're sort of a little bit more negative about ourselves, where we see more of our vices than our virtues. But that should be put to good use. It shouldn't be an excuse to, wail and weep and beat ourselves up. It's more about, well, if you don't like what you see, if you don't like your offerings, if you don't like what you've got, how can it be improved? What needs to change? And often it's something you're a little bit weak on, that you haven't bothered with. There's a loose end. There's something you never did. Just recently, somebody I've been working with is at a great disadvantage in a course that he's working on, because everybody else on the course has gone through every stage of it. He's joined at a later time and he hasn't put in the stepping stones. They're not there. And so he's constantly playing catch up and trying to get ahead and feeling an awful sense of disappointment all the time. And you know, that can sometimes be something worth looking at when Saturn is moving through your second house. What steps have you missed? What things didn't you put in carefully enough? And that, can you address them now and redo them? Or do you have to find a way of compensating for them? And it's also about sometimes our offerings aren't appreciated, but it doesn't mean they're never going to be appreciated, or they weren't appreciated. It's just you've got to learn to go through a time when you may not get the money that you deserve. You may be short of money. You may have to learn how to budget. You may have to learn how to do on very, very little. And it may be that you have to go out into the world, so to speak, with your offerings, and they are unwanted. And it's both the sense of still feeling worthy of oneself, because my goodness, you know you are worth what you do, who you are. It's just a time other people aren't appreciating it. Maybe you can find a way of showing them that they can appreciate it, working at new ways to do that. But what you should never do is intrinsically say to yourself, you are not worthy. You can get better. You can do things better. You can approach things in a different way. Those are things that we can all do, but eating away at the core of this is not a lack of sense of self. You are who you are, and you know what you offer and what you have and your assets, whatever they may be. And it's recognizing that that's you, and you are going through a short period where you are undervalued, where there is struggle, but it's not forever. It's how to work it, how to make it a meaningful period, how to hold your head high, and how to accept other people's lack of gratitude or appreciation of who you are. It will change, but it's learning to live with that, and more important, to have that sense of dignity and purpose within that phase. Now, we're coming up to this full moon, which is one of the points at which Saturn and its messages and its experiences are going to be very present. And that full moon is going to exacerbate all those feelings that I've just mentioned, all those situations. It's both a time of crisis, and when you bring things to a head, then they can be resolved. But it can also be a time of completion. And so Saturn brings rewards. So you really do make it financially at this time. You make a breakthrough deal with someone. Someone values you and wants you, so that we get consolidation and crystallization at these Saturnian junctions, of which I've given you other times during the year. But there's also those times where you feel you failed, or you're not appreciated, you don't have enough. You do. It'll take time. All right, Aquarius, and that is really all the zodiac that I have gone through. And as I said in, before I, went through sign by sign, Saturn is coming in with at a new resonance. It's not the same as it was last year. You've already had some experience, so you're now coming at it in a different way. And that will make all the difference. There are new challenges, there will be new rewards, there will be new understandings and new achievements. That's what Saturn is going to do for you. So I don't want to go over old ground, but I have reached that point in my videos where I sort of make a conclusion. And it's something that I mentioned in light of Saturn going through Pisces, which is the idea of atonement, and that we've seen this happening with the post office and all those workers. It's been so vivid that, for 20 years, there's been this huge miscarriage of justice, and somehow they found the strength to go forward through great adversity and are now seeing other people having to atone for their actions. We're all going through this in some way or another, whether it's financially, whether it's with friendships, whether it's with love affairs and relationships, whether it's through our children, whether it's through our health. Atonement, having to understand why this is coming before us and how we now have to accept it and deal with it, but in such a way that we just don't throw up our arms and say, oh, life is unfair. You know, I don't deserve this, even though we may say that to ourselves. I don't deserve this. Why have I got it? It's sort of meeting it and saying, okay, somehow this has come to me, this Saturnian event that's come to me from either a distant past, maybe it's the past of your ancestors. It's coming through the genetic line and you're the one who has to atone for it. Or maybe it's a karmic past and you're thinking about past lives and that what's come before you now is a result of those actions. So this is not a time to put up your hands and panic and get upset about it and blame. No, that's the absolute opposite. First of all, there's acceptance. This is the way it is. This is what's happened, and I can't rewind the clock. This is it. It may stem from something that happened in the past, but I have to live with it now. And it's in dealing with that in a really going forward way, a sense of going to move through this with my head up. You know, I'm going to learn from it, and I'm not going to mind admitting I'm wrong or I'm admitting I made a mistake. I'm going to do all of that and in the process still retain my dignity. That's the technique with which we have to apply that. And I think another factor which I've talked about a lot, but it's the fear factor, because Saturn in our charts represents what we fear. So when we've got Saturn going through Pisces, it's irrational fears, it's fears of the unknown, it's fears of what we can't control or touch, which is supersized. So we have to really recognize that fear is useful in certain situations. It helps us survive. You know, the fear of something helps us be aware of how we can deal with it and how we should protect ourselves from it. Fear can be good in a survival sense. But otherwise, when it's fear of what may never happen, is negative. And if you know, good fear, if you like, energizes us, and negative fear diminishes us. It paralyzes us. It enervates us. So we have to have courage with fear. We have to recognize we're feeling fearful about things, whether it's something in our own lives, very personal, or whether we're fearing what's going on in the world. We can't do anything about it. Just feeling fearful is no good at all. It's about what courage does it inspire to tackle the things we can do, and in the spirit that we can look at what's happening out in the world. And as humanity goes through this difficult passage, we need courage. That's the important thing. I think I should really end there, don't you? It's been a long journey, hasn't it? Well, these Saturnian journeys are always long, but I hope you got a lot out of it. And again, thank you for your support. I treasure it. I value it. Your comments, everything. Much appreciated. Bye for now.